Unwanted and orphaned children were not new in the world. Since the dawn of history, various methods have been used to solve the problem. Some people have favored exposure, putting the child out to die in the wild, while others have preferred selling into slavery. By the early 19th century, these practices were still used, only now they were called abandonment, and sometimes it was leaving a baby in a basket by a door of a home or on the steps of a church. In New York, in the middle years of the last century, it was a common occurrence. Nearly a day would pass without someone finding the body of an unwanted baby suffocated in an ash can, thrown into a back alley, or floating down one of the rivers. Birth control was not known of yet, and abortion was illegal and hazardous. The unwanted child who was lucky enough to stay alive under these circumstances got treated pretty much the same way as a normal adult. Between 1854 and 1929, more than 2,000 children rode orphan trains from eastern cities to the west to be placed in homes. The Children's Aid Society in New York started the program in an attempt to provide good homes for orphans who might face a life of poverty and crime. Many of these children were not orphans, but had parents who were unable to take care of them. Some orphan train riders found good families and were adopted, and others were brought for help around the home in the fields. The children were much like those described in Oliver Twist. Abandoned and left wandering in the streets, some resorted to crime while others begged in an effort to survive. Nearly all the orphans were those of immigrants who came into New York from Europe, but faced with little housing and few jobs, many of the immigrants were forced to leave their babies on doorsteps or to let loved ones go to try to make it on their own. They were not criminals in the eyes of the law. They were thieves, but they were only guilty of stealing small amounts to keep from dying. They slept in doorways, boxes, old wagons, or on benches in the park. Some made it by begging or stealing, while others swept crossways, picked over cans, gathered rags, boxes, or paper, some old matches, toothpicks, and other small articles. Others sold apples, oranges, and flowers on the street corner. Another large group were newsboys. A New York minister, C.L. Brace, saw that these street children were bound to get into trouble, cause trouble, or become victims of trouble, so he came up with a remedy. He helped form the Children's Aid Society in February 1853. For the most part, Brace directed the organization. At first, the society worked to get children off the street by providing food and shelter and making industrial schools. A workshop for pegging shoes was opened for boys, while girls were taught sewing or some light trade. But numbers of the children began to increase, so the board came up with different methods of taking care of them. After they considered many alternatives, the board developed the Placing Out program. It began in 1854 when a small group of 47 boys ages 7 to 5 and one superior made a trip from New York City to Daiwan. There the boys were picked over by farmers to help them with farm work. In return, the farmers promised to treat the children as part of the family and to provide for their education. A small number continued to be placed out in various farms of upper New York and nearby states over. In later cases, parents wanted their kids to join orphan trains for a better life. Most of the children did well, and under the changed circumstances, gave evidence that they were attempting to lead a new and better life. After children got off the trains, they were led to the town hall, with a crowd following close behind. The children were treated with a good dinner. As the children ate, they were constantly interrupted by members of the crowd, who circulated among the tables and spoke to them briefly, or who would reach down and feel their arms and legs to see how muscular they were. After they had eaten, the children were lined up in front of the hall. There, child by child, individuals, couples, and entire families in the crowd selected young kids to be taken home and raised as their own children. The children passed over would ride the next train to the next town for a similar evaluation. Between 1954 and 1857, nearly 1,000 children between the ages of 5 and 18 were gathered from the streets and sent west. By 1873, the total number of children sent to colonize in the western states had reached 25,000. and the farmers and ranchers were still asking for more. In that fact, the colonizing efforts became so efficient that the company from the west sent out an average of 100 children each alternate Tuesday during the spring and summer months. Notices would be sent out to certain towns along the rail lines announcing the arrival of the orphan train and the need for foster homes. These notices often appeared in newspapers or on place cards around the town before the train arrived. Wanted, homes for children. They would often read of various ages and both sexes. Well disciplined, it would also list the society's terms such as educating the child in school and church up to the age of 16. The decline of orphan trains came about due to a variety of reasons. As social work became more professionalized, instead of sending children into strange environments, they were trying to keep needy families from breaking up. In 1990, the first White House Conference on Children was called by Theodore Roosevelt. It recommended that, whenever possible, children be kept with the parents. New laws began to pass to help mothers and children. Child labor was a major issue. Previously, Americans had taken most forms of child labor for granted. When the orphan train movement began, people thought and looked at children as smaller, less intelligent adults, who they could treat however they wanted. As attitudes about child labor changed, less people thought of foster care and adoption as a loss. That also made it harder for people to place older boys. Now there are much more demand, especially for childless couples for girls and babies for adoption. Child labor legislation ended the orphan trade in 1929. One Orphan's Odyssey. The boy listed on the New York birth certificate as John Wallace Price was a 7-year-old veteran of foster homes on the day in late November 1914. When a woman arrived from the Children's Aid Society, she told me I was going to go to Nebraska, out where you would see cowboys, Indians, and buffalo. He agreed. The news kind of pepped him up. For John and 26 others ages 1 to 16, the train ride was the most pleasantly exciting experience of their unhappy lives. It took 3 days and 2 nights to get to Nebraska. He remembers they took out all the seats and put them back crossways to make beds. It was like a big family. They had milk, bread, and red jelly sandwiches, 3 meals a day. To this day, John still doesn't eat jelly. The train stopped at Lincoln, and fortunately the children were led away. On Friday, December 11th, the train eased up to the Auburn Depot. Miss Alice Burgos and of the Children's Aid Society whisked the 13 remaining children down to the Maclay Opera House. People of the town patiently waited for them to arrive. They were seated in semicircle on the stage. John wore short pants. He was so nervous that he vaguely remembers what happened. I think they made each of us stand. They told our names and ages, then the people picked us as they wanted. Charles Harmon was out of town selling steam thrashes that day, and his wife Vinnie tagged along to the event with her sister-in-law, Janet McCarthy. Janet, deciding John looked like baby pictures of her husband, picked the boy at the last second. She left John with Charles and Vinnie Harmon, her sister-in-law, for a week while she traveled to Kansas City. By the time she returned, John, Vinnie, and Charles had fallen in love. "You can't have him," Vinnie said. Janet let the boy pick, so he did. 74 years later, John Wallace Price still goes by his adopted name, John R. Harmon. He still chokes with emotion as he tells the story.